So let's get right into our first lab on writing our first SQL query. For those of you unfamiliar with SQL query, SQL, it stands for Standard Query Language. And it's a fairly simple language used to be able to query tables, which we could see over here on the left-hand side, inside of our database, which is right here, also on our left-hand side. Inside each table, you're going to have a series of fields with values in it, so you could think of it very similar to a spreadsheet with columns and rows, and where the SQL language is going to be used to pull out different columns, different rows, and we're going to write some fancy queries by the end of this online class. So let's go ahead and write our first query. So you could click on New Query here at the top, and in Management Studio, it will tell you what database you're connected to. Since this was the last one we connected to, it should already be lined up. But let's look at some basic syntax and make sure everything works the way we want it to. So we're going to go ahead and query the dim account table. And the way you do that is the very first the word you write is select. And we're going to use the wildcard star, which means every single column in the table. And it's going to be from, and then the table name, dim account. And if you click on execute, it runs that query and it goes ahead and pulls back every single column in that table, and you're able to browse that data pretty easily. If you don't want to select star and grab all the columns, you could go ahead and specify the actual field names. So let's just grab the account key and the account description. And with that, and you run that, and then the query will only come back with the two columns you are interested in. A few interesting items to note with this query that we wrote that's different from other programming languages is that there's no semicolon at the end of this line of code. A lot of programming languages make that mandatory. It doesn't help or hurt to have one, but it is not a mandatory programming feature. Also, SQL is not case sensitive on default setup. So we could just say account key, account description, and you will still get the same two results, and your output will mirror the way you wrote it. It is best practice to try to mirror your actual names, but you can also do aliases on your columns. So we could say as a K, as a D, and in that case, when the query runs, it aliases the output the way you specified. We'll get a little bit more into aliasing later in the labs as well. Again, some other best practices, it's always, because everything doesn't need to be on a single line, it's easier to format code so where it's a little bit more readable. And again, if you kind of space things out, the query still runs. You could have a semicolon to make it easier, and again, still pretty straightforward to run your query. So try to format your queries so that they follow a standard pattern, that they're easy to read, especially as our queries begin to get more complex as we go. Here are a few tips and tricks for writing SQL in Management Studio against SQL Server that will be useful for the remainder of the labs. For starters, when you start writing select commands, IntelliSense is already baked in, which means it will go through and try to guess what you're trying to type. So if you do a select star from, you can instantly just start typing, and it will begin guessing tables available in the schema that you're connected to. So here we could do dim account or dim currency, and it auto-populates. This also works the same for columns as well. So we could say, let's go grab a column name that we know is already in there to show how it works. Dim currency. So if we start typing in the letter C, U, R, you'll see that these columns start populating themselves as well. Here we've connected to the dim currency table via this server and via this database. So since everything's wired, this works. But had we not been in this database and this had been changed, this table would not exist and there'd be a problem. This can be fixed by appending the database name in your string. Dim currency. And this way, when you run the query, you do not need to specify what database it's connected to and what server it's connected to. And you could just run the query and it works that way as well. So we're going to be doing the remainder of the lab without these connected and making sure that our server is connected correctly. But again, you could have it in there. If you're working with multiple servers, multiple link servers, it's just best to have that in there to keep things clean. This middle title here is your schema. It's going to be DBO. So if you have different schemas in your database, you could also specify that as well to write cleaner queries. Also, when you're writing codes, commenting is going to be a big thing. So commenting is when you have lines of code or text in your code that you do not want to run at execution time. And in SQL, there are two ways of doing that. The first way is going to be 2 dashes. And the other one is going to be /*, and then everything that comes after that is going to be commented out until you close that comment block with another /*. And you'll see that the coloring changes as well. So if I run this query, the only piece of code being executed is this bottom piece of code right here.